Zane, I want to correct the record a little bit here about how all this came to pass, because certainly Bart knows the part of the story where I had direct contact with him. What he of course doesn't know is that I was meeting with Richard and at the very same time trying to understand what needed to be done to try to move things forward. But why I thought there was even something to do was because I had been watching both the campaign of Antonio Villaraigosa to become mayor in Los Angeles. And I knew Antonio a little bit from previous work when he had been here at Metro, or he was actually on staff of Gloria Molina. He was a proxy for her on the planning committee when I was an executive director of Coalition for Clean Air, and Metro had a bunch of methanol buses they were going to retire and replace with diesel. And we brought a campaign up to the committee, we the Coalition for Clean Air, and said, no, 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 we got the dirtiest air. Metro must lead on this. We need to do like Sacramento was doing, like Pierce Transit and Washington State was doing. We need to get natural gas on the road. And Antonio Villaraigosa heard that as a committee member, picked up the ball and ran with it, and convinced the other board members that that was the right thing to do. And we now have the largest clean fleet in America because of that day when Antonio carried the ball. And I was very impressed with the energy and effort and coalition capability that he showed them. Did not know, of course, that he would then run for the assembly and become the speaker, and eventually carry a bill for Coalition for Clean Air, which became the Carl Moyer program, which provides millions of dollars, really, in grants for alternatives to diesel technology, mostly natural gas trucks and buses and the like, etc. So that was my working relationship. And so when Antonio ran on a platform that was very strongly pro-transit, and was elected, my thought was, maybe there's an opportunity here, but I don't know. And he had talked a lot about the subway to the sea, and there was this process that began. You may recall, the federal government, at the behest of Congressman Waxman, had made it unlawful for federal money to be used for subways in the Wilshire corridor. We began to see a dialogue play out in the press where Congressman Waxman was really revising this and willing to consider, and ultimately did have that ban lifted. And it was that moment for me that I thought, holy cow, maybe something is possible here. And not long after that, there was a moment in time when the congestion froze. It was like it had been slush before, and then really froze, hit ice. And it was being talked about in the press a lot. It was suddenly the talk was all about how the gridlock had really worsened at this moment. And I, with a buddy of mine, Terry O'Day, now a council member, now Mayor Pro Tem in Santa Monica, we started getting together saying, Antonio wants to do this, but we need to help put a constituency coalition because mayors aren't kings. They got to, the way democracy works, you got to have a constituency coalition to make it work. And that's when we started meeting with Richard and talking. Now, I knew Richard from back in the 70s. He had been president of the Santa Monica Democratic Club before he went to the Valley. Now, I was like, what the hell are you doing? So, and so, and he had been, chair of the, as you know, he was elected to the Assembly, I forget how many years, 10, 12 years. In the Assembly, he had been chair of the Assembly Transportation Committee, and had written the legislation that created this agency, right? And he and I had worked together, you probably doesn't remember this, when I was at the Coalition for Clean Air, on formulating a smog check program for the state of California. So I had a working relationship with Richard and history with Richard, and I knew that he was a real player on these issues, and that he was close to Antonio, and of course he was on the Metro board. And so we began to talk about, so what do we need to do? Who do we need to try to get together with? Who do we, how do we get this going? And so Richard was always the guy who was kind of on the institutional inside, giving us our cues about what would work and who needed to be, who's this coalition we got to build. We're calling the meetings and trying to make it happen. And there was one remarkable day when we called 35 organizations together for a meeting in Dan Rosenfeld's office in the Bradbury building before he ever worked with Mark River Thomas. He was chair of the Chamber of Transportation Land Use Committee. And we called 35 of the most important organizations in the county together, just hoping somebody would show up to talk about what the hell we're going to do. And 34 of those 35 showed up. It was like everybody came. The one who didn't come had a meeting, an event of their own that day. So it showed us that there was really a kind of convergence of judgment here, that there was problems afoot, and that maybe now with this, Antonio as mayor, and maybe with this federal lift happening, things could get going. And that really was the backdrop that led to the conference and the events which brought Measure R. And this is, I know you think this is the day when Barack Obama becomes president. It is. It is all, well, actually he gets elected. He isn't president until a few months later. But this is the day, this is Measure R, victory party, Wednesday morning. And believe me, we are in shock. Because 2/3 seemed like such an insurmountable hill to climb, and to actually have climbed it. Just by way of reflection, in 1980, LA County adopted a half-cent sales tax, 50.1%. In 1990, it adopted a second half, 50.6%, barely getting majorities, And then the courts ruled that transportation agencies are special districts, and any measure they put on the ballot is a special tax. Therefore, any future measure has to get 2/3. And so for almost 20 years, nobody even thinks about a ballot measure because, 2/3 is so impossible. But we had done some polling, and the part of the secret story here is that poll that MoveLA did was paid for by Santa Monica College. And they paid for that poll at my request because we were urgently looking for money to show that this was plausible, a plausible scenario. But they were interested in this because the expo line was planned to have, or was envisioned, it wasn't planned yet, to have a station at 17th and Colorado, 17th and Olympic, which would be a short walk to the college. And they knew that traffic congestion from students driving was their single biggest problem. Screwed over all of their political relations and parking and the cost and the land use and management. It was like, whoa. So they were ready to be a player in this, at least enough to do the poll. And I shot that poll off to Richard and Jaime de la Vega and Zev and a few other people. Said, hey, check this out. And so a couple polls in succession, and everybody's going, the Metro does and Antonio does. This really looks like a play up here. And so, but 6 weeks before this happens, what else happens? The economy goes off a cliff. Right? I mean, remember that day you're watching TV and there's President Bush and candidate Obama, and they're on the TV together, and you're looking at this thinking, is this the end of the world as we know it? It's reminded me of the song that Jeff Bridges sings in that movie Crazy Heart. He says, even falling feels like flying for a little while. It's like, when will we hit? But we didn't hit. We're still flying. And in fact, our pitch to you is that we think we still have more flying to do. These are the lines, 12 of them, in the Measure R transit project. 70% of the money in Measure R goes to transit. Believe me, the world is taking notice of that. They are amazed that 2/3 of the voters in Los Angeles County, the highway capital of the known, the automobile capital of the known universe, would vote 2/3 for a measure that was more than 2/3 transit funding. Amazing. And now we want to talk about what we think. There's a new regime. Before I go much further, we're going to have this event on June 12th to honor Mayor Villaraigosa. without whom none of this really would have happened. This wouldn't have happened. Not only because he was the inspiration for those of us who did organizing that it was even possible to do this, but he provided the coalition leadership at the Metro Board, and he did all the fundraising for Metro. Well, maybe not all the fundraising, like 80% of the fundraising. No, there is simply no question that on this program, Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa is the guy who carried the ball and brought it over the end zone. He deserves credit for what I think is a program that rivals, William Holland's water project, with one big difference. This time it was democratic. People got to vote. So now we think there's a new mayor coming in, and frankly, I would have been very happy if Wendy Gruhl had won. I'm very happy having to work with Eric Garcetti. I think both the candidates were very strong on this issue. They each had their personal strengths. I think they both felt a strong conviction and commitment to carrying through in the Measure R program. And so, this message is the same message we would have been given if it had been Wendy Gruhl who was mayor. But we think this new mayor is very much in the same vein as Antonio Villaraigosa with respect to these issues, and has his own special talents and some maybe shades of priorities differences, but he's going to be carrying the ball, I think, well, and we have an opportunity for an even bigger program than what we will see here, we think. Okay? Top 10 priorities. First one, we think, is we've got to get Congress to adopt the America Fast Forward bond program. That is, I think, doable, very doable now. There's a lot of interest, even on the Republican side, in this program, because everybody needs some infrastructure investment in their districts and in their states. And the America Fast Forward program is where the federal government becomes a smart lender, not just a big spender. Meaning, you take $1 billion, you can either make a $1 billion grant, or you can capitalize for that $1 billion financing programs that can give $10 billion loans. The America Fast Forward is the bookend bond program to the TIFIA loan program that Antonio went to Washington, and Richard went to Washington, and Jaime went to Washington, and made happen thanks to the leadership and cooperation of the good Senator Barbara Boxer, who happened by fate to be chair of the key committee. I mean, how lucky are we that Senator Boxer was in the position she was in at the moment we had the big idea for how to accelerate our program. But we got one of them done. This is the second bookend. The other one, the TIFIA loan program, is a direct loan. This bond program is where private lenders give loan money essentially to Metro, and they get tax credits from the federal government to pay down the interest rate. But this is a program that should appeal to Republicans because it's a public-private partnership. It's not a direct government-to-government loan, and the federal government gets paid back, right? Unlike grants, which we love grants, we want more grants. But this is a strategy to mobilize more communities in a smart way. So this needs to be priority number one. I think this wins, and it wins this year. There is, I think, very, very good signs of real interest, even on the Republican side, in this program. For example, we have Representative Gary Miller out here in San Bernardino, who won in a district that could have gone Democrat. So he's got a tough re-election fight. He's now chair of a goods movement infrastructure committee, and he will be hearing from constituents that this program could help them in the Inland Empire. And there are other signs of real interest on the Republican side as well. Yes?
Do you think the disaster in Minnesota is going to help with us obtaining some state of California metro?
You mean Washington State, the bridge?
Washington State, I'm sorry.
Well, there's a friend of mine who is got an economic advisor role in the White House, who asked if this program could apply to bridges. You know, it can apply to any infrastructure where there's a revenue stream. You know, you might want to make a specific inclusion in the legislation, but there's no reason why this couldn't apply to bridge reconstruction as well. Okay. second thing we need to do is that we need to build the kind of coalition that lowers the local voter threshold to 55% in California. I'm not sure if this is a 2014 or a 2016 play. It'll depend upon polling, but there's a lot of interest around the state. Alameda County also had a measure go down by like much closer, like 600 votes. And there are, I think, 8 bills now in the state legislature for some form of lowering the voter threshold. 4 of them include transportation. Lonnie Hancock's Senate Constitutional Amendment 11 includes all local government agencies, transportation, cities, counties, schools, colleges, etc. And you know, polls have been ranging from the high 40s to the high 50s on this idea. So we're working on putting together the kind of coalition so that when it comes, you know, spring 2014, we're looking at fresh polling, you know, that's like a year after the last budget debate in Sacramento, when people's minds are not, you know, or unduly influenced by recent elections, and get a fresh view of how they feel about this. And if the polling is good, then there's a very good prospect of going to the state ballot in 2014.
Oh, so good.
You need 2/3 vote from each house in the legislature, and then a majority vote of the voters. You don't need 2/3.
That's my question, sorry.
Right.
All right.
Prop 13 didn't need 2/3 to create 2/3 requirement, did it?
No.
Yes.
Denny, what's the significance of the 55%?
Well, that is just an historical artifact from the moment in 2002 when some folks at CTA brought forward a school bond, a reform to allow school bonds to go down to 55%. They were thinking, and their polling then was just, if we go down to a majority, we might not win. 55% was still a supermajority, but not like 2/3. And since that won in 2002, you know, that's been essentially the benchmark that other reforms have been tagged to. Voters have been familiar with it. There have been about 272 school bonds that have passed. So 55%, more than half would have failed if it's still been 2/3. All right, so this is a big deal, and we think the next mayor should be, you know, part of this coalition, although you don't want it led by a politician. All right. We also think that 2016 is a big opportunity. 2012 compared to 2008 had a 10% lower turnout. If the 2012 turnout had been comparable to the 2008 turnout, Measure J would have passed. Now, but what it showed us, the big signal, the big aha moment for all of us, is that voters in LA County voted twice in favor of sales tax measures for transportation. Now, I don't think voters really got it that this was an extension, and partly because in that campaign, the governor signed the authorizing legislation on the last day he could legally do it, and it really shortened the fundraising period for the campaign, and it meant that instead of doing several different kinds of TV spots, we could only do one. And so the opportunity for conveying, you know, several kinds of messages was lost. And so I think voters with Measure J actually thought they were still voting for another sales tax. But in any event, 2016 will be another high turnout election. Always happens when you got presidential elections without an incumbent. And if Hillary Clinton is running, it'll be like the Obama turnout. That's a big opportunity for us. We should be thinking about a county measure. 2016, Metro should be thinking about a county measure at that time, because voters have shown they want to invest in this system. We should give them that opportunity, especially at this high turnout election. We'll get into some of the ideas that we have about what might be included in such a measure. Measure R, if you look at the map, creates opportunities for enhancements, extensions, and gap closures that are extraordinary. That if you close those gaps, the level of connectivity and efficiency that the system would have would be remarkable. So much greater than even Measure R would create. One example, if you extend the Crenshaw line from X position where it now will end, just to Wilshire, the entire Wilshire corridor will have direct access to LAX via rail. And the entire Crenshaw corridor would have direct access to one of the key job centers of this region. There's one example. The light rail connect. Now, this is a game changer. I'm sure you've heard this talked about. The notion of a rail system under Sepulveda Pass, possibly in a tunnel funded by a toll road that would be part of the project. You know, when I dream out loud, as I often do, like I am doing right here today, you know, it would not be that, if that public-private partnership arrangement can actually do that tunnel, and the public side then becomes extending it to Sylmar or extending it to LAX, then you've got a serious, serious game changer. A project that rivals the Wilshire Subway for its consequence for traffic congestion and economic development. It would be a remarkable accomplishment. And that would be doable with a new measure. That would, together with the P3 program, I think Richard can talk all about that. Extending the Foothill Gold Line to San Bernardino County, and then on to Ontario Airport, that would be, San Bernardino County part would be Sandbag out there in San Bernardino County. Are they eager for that? Oh, you bet. They are so eager for that. Extending the East Side Gold Line, now there's a debate. Whittier, Almonte, Whittier, Almonte, Whittier, Almonte. We should be sending that system to both Whittier and Almonte. Making sure we fully fund the Green Line Crenshaw connecting into LAX. Finishing the subway to the sea. Some people say the ridership to Santa Monica isn't good enough, high enough, because Expo takes a lot of ridership. Well, you know, let's get it to Dundee then, right? This is, that's an exceptional opportunity. The Green Line could have been, should have been, some say, continued past Redondo into Torrance. The Harbor Subdivision line there is available for that. The West Santa Ana line that now goes from Paramount to Cerritos in the Measure R program, not fully funded. If fully funded, that could go from downtown to Cerritos, and Orange County could take it on to Santa Ana. San Fernando Valley, if you go to the meetings of the San Fernando Valley Council of Governments, what they're dreaming out loud about is this connection that would run from the Orange Line and Burbank Airport to connect up with the Gold Line, Foothill Gold Line, and connect the two valleys. That is a very compelling source of connectivity for our region. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this last one in a moment, but let's see. In general, the whole P3 model is a way of mobilizing new capital. It doesn't work without public capital. You know, if you go to Vancouver and you look at the P3 subway that they built for the Winter Olympics, you know, a fourth of the money came from private investors. But 3/4 of it came from the public. This has really got to be a partnership. There ain't no P3 that works with, I mean, toll roads can work, I guess, because they generate enough revenue on their own, but a transit, on the transit's, you know, you only get 30% maybe a fare box recovery. So you got to have some extra public capital to make that work. So P3s I think there's a number of big opportunities for P3s, but we got to be prepared as a public, you know, to have our own resources. We want to be negotiating that deal from a position of strength. It's all about the deal. There's a good deal, there's a bad deal. The stronger the public sector side is, and the better the deal. Upgraded the regional Metrolink commuter rail system. There's a 435 miles. Richard's here as chair of the Metrolink system. And I guess your priority is the Los Angeles corridor, a piece of that which runs from Ventura through the valley, Union Station, and then on down to Anaheim and San Diego. Now, that's a 435-mile system that's very much underutilized. It lacks a core funding source because it's the stepchild of 5 different agencies. we need to think about how to create a core funding source for that program so that the projects are not stepchildren to all the other county agencies. And that's very doable. A truly regional airport system. Burbank should be connected by rail. Ontario Airport, which is the biggest, most important economic development opportunity in the Inland Empire, and rivals that, I think, of any in Southern California, and is an enormous opportunity both for the Inland Empire and for the San Gabriel Valley. That should be connected by Metrolink with express service into downtown Los Angeles. I mean, how many of you followed the story where in downtown LA, Brookfield, is a big office corporation, bought 6 buildings? Well, what does that mean? Well, what it really means is the biggest office corporation in America thinks that downtown LA is now a big deal. But there's an economic future here that's they think is incredibly viable. And everybody knows that this is being repopulated, right? So the whole idea that an express service might bring business travelers from Ontario Airport as well as LAX into this downtown is an enormous opportunity both for this downtown and for the San Gabriel Valley and the Inland Empire. And that is a doable proposition. That system exists. It would not be that costly to remedy it, a little double tracking, a little modernization, little grade separations here and there. This is very doable. Collaboration between the counties is important. Antonio's leadership on greening of the ports is, I think, been remarkable. When I was at the Coalition for Clean Air in the early 90s, the ports was always thought to be the utterly undoable problem. How are you ever going to get clean air strategies that work at the port? I mean, it's an international thing. It's got federal law. It's got international treaties. It's got, what the hell, how did all that together? Well, you know what? They did it. And I am, it was the single biggest source of air pollution in our region, and the worst kind of air pollution, diesel emissions. And that part, that remedy, that is a world model that will be replicated around the world in country after country that has a port. And the new mayor's got to treat that like that's, we got to deepen, we got to further, we got to extend that effort. All right, so Metro and the City of Los Angeles, Metro has negotiated with SCAG, I think, an MOU about the implementation of a sustainable community strategies, which includes lots of commitment to bicycle and pedestrian. Well, the City of Los Angeles is also developing a very strong bicycle pedestrian program, first mile, last mile program. The new mayor needs to continue that effort because it's really just beginning to gel. Eric can tell us all about it if we give him a moment. And then the transit corridors cabinet. Mayor Villaraigosa launched this. It's a coordination of the decision-making planning bodies in the city to focus their attention, their priorities on ensuring that the station areas around the transit systems are developed in a fashion that optimizes the use of the system and optimizes the economic development, facilitates access, and tries to ensure equity, which is, the fundamental there is really affordable housing. And that's, my life, my politically active life, begins with affordable housing. Organizing rent control campaigns in Santa Monica and affordable housing strategies there. I came into the transportation world from the affordable housing activist world. And in my view, and I think it's an easily sustained view, the system does not operate remotely at the efficiency and success it needs to and can if we don't ensure that there is affordable housing both preserved and provided anew in the station areas around that. These are high propensity transit users. That's what we need to do both for purposes of our commitment to equity in our community, but also to ensure that it really fulfills its transit mission. High propensity users are a key. Those are part of what we dream about at MoveLA, and we think all of this is doable. It is Measure R2, It is doable because the conditions are right for it to be done. 2016 will have the higher turnout. We already know that we have a voting base willing to vote on this. We also will have a better economy than 2008 had. You know, we also will have a better fiscal outlook, both state and locally, than we had in 2008. The demographics of the state of California and Los Angeles County are moving in the right direction for support for public investment. 2016 is a moment we should seize. Well, those of you who've seen this know that there's a map that comes out of this. You get to see
Check out the website.
the future of the system.
It's on YouTube.
Those lines, new lines, subway lines, rail lines, bus lines, let's connect those lines, those new lines, let's hear the rail, the line.
First time I watched that, that's kind of cute. And then it came up again, and I was like, I can't stop thinking.
Red lines connected to the gold line, now hear the rail, the line. The orange lines connected to the red line, silver lines connected to the red line, silver lines connected to the gold line, the purple lines connected to the gold line, Expo's connected to the blue line, Expo's connected to the red line, now here's the line.
Richard Katz. We all hope that there's a continuing role for Richard Katz at Metro because he's been the maestro of the program and coalition building, and it's been great to work with him.
I probably need to put a commercial in at this point. In that, well, for Richard Katz. No, I'll let you do really quickly. Anybody that wants to drop a line to Mayor-elect, Eric Garcetti, and I'm just saying this on me because he doesn't want me to do this. So, to the Mayor-elect, and to ask that Richard stay aboard Metro. He's held us for the last 20 years, and time for change. Yeah, it's time to change to keep you. So, thank you. All right, Richard Katz.
Thank you. Denny, thank you also. Thank you all for being here. And of course, Denny, having been a fellow collaborator for a long time, we could not have done this without Denny. Denny and I are two guys who bring sort of old school technique to some of this stuff because we're old enough and still somewhat competent enough to deliver in this world and still remember old world ways of doing business, which is part of what Denny does better than anybody. If you want to do grassroots and go door to door and form coalitions, there's nobody better in the country than Denny. And they had asked, did you go back to Detroit for that? Yes. They had invited Denny to go back to Detroit because they thought there'd be this great seminar in Detroit, of all places, about mass transit, because they have none. And, you know, it's sort of ground zero for that whole discussion, and it was appropriate that Denny be there for that, because he really is the man who knows how to bring people together. And along with Lori and everybody at MoveLA have just done a phenomenal job. I wanted to thank them for that. Also, people at MTA don't get nearly enough credit for the hard work they do. This is a large organization, and it doesn't always do things as fast as we'd like it to. It almost never does things as fast as I'd like it to, but my speed usually isn't realistic for most projects. But they are good people working hard who care about the system and care about making it work. And the same thing at MetroLink, where, you know, here we are 5 years after the Chatsworth accident, and when the mayor asked me to go on the MetroLink board, which was the Saturday after the accident, the mayor was still at the site. He got out there, I don't know how many know the story, but he got out to the MetroLink crash site about 4 o'clock that afternoon, 4 or 5 o'clock the Friday afternoon, which I believe was September 21st, 21. That was the other thing in 2008.
11.
12th.
September 12th, I'm sorry, September 12th in 2008. That was the other thing that happened right before the election, was a MetroLink crash. And, you know, the commitment that I made to him and Jaime made to him when he called us from the scene that Saturday was, that we would try and make this the safest railroad in America before he left office. And he leaves office in about 5 weeks, and I'd say, he may not have done everything by July 1st, but by the end of this year, this will be close to being the safest railroad in America. It's the first railroad to have inward and outward facing cameras in the cabs. You know, the engineer in the Metrolink crash was texting. I texted 20 seconds before that crash. It sent something like 100 texts that morning. It's also giving ride-alongs to people, which was a little outrageous. But there were a lot of reasons that was a bad situation. But inward, outward facing cameras. We have crash energy management cars that diffuse collisions. We're the only ones in the country so far. Actually, there's another system looking at them that we helped design so that in case of a head-on crash, the energy is diffused around the car as opposed to splitting the car off the center, which is what happened in Chatsworth. You know, we changed our training. We got rid of Veolia as a contractor. We changed our training. We upped it above what everyone else does in the industry. We had a lot of input from the folks who work there and kept it going, and we will this year be the first in the country to deploy in service positive train control, which is probably technologically the most advanced safety system and most important life-saving technique in the railroad industry we'll see in any of our lives. This is a GPS computer control system that slows trains to a stop, but what makes it more complicated, because we can do that today, normally it happens very abruptly and everybody goes flying. But what we do with GPS and with the positive train control, it takes into account the weight of the train, the grade the train's on, the weather conditions, all these other factors, so that if an engineer has a heart attack and doesn't, and runs a red light, for instance, the system automatically slows the train to a stop. It doesn't wait to call and find out if everything's okay. It just, you blow a signal, you know, some number of other situations, this system automatically slows the train down. And had it been in place in Chatsworth, it may not have stopped the collision, but this was an 80-mile-an-hour each direction head-on. It would have significantly reduced it and probably saved the vast majority of those 25 lives that were lost. So one of the reasons we fight so strongly for positive train control is we know that every year it's delayed, someone's going to die who didn't have to. And in fact, Sunday, the American Public Transit Association is continuing to promote a delay in positive train control, and MTA and Metrolink and Orange County Transportation and some others, we're going back to the APTA meeting again to try and convince them they're wrong. So we're on our position of keeping the 2015 deadline, forcing this, not forcing it, but I mean to have the deadline and encouraging people to make the right decisions like we did at Metrolink is a life-saving issue. And APTA, for whatever reason, as a public transit agency, is not going in that direction. So we're going to be back lobbying hard. It will not affect our program. We're going to do it whether they want to or not, and we will save lives whether they want to or not, because the people on the Metrolink board are willing to make the hard decisions and prioritize saving lives. Back to what we're talking about tonight in terms of the future of transportation. I think Denny did a really good job of how we got here, what we're doing. MTA is really the place in the country you want to be now if you're in transportation or planning and want to be on the cutting edge, because we are doing things no one else is doing. We have resources to do thanks to the voters. We have ANC, as Denny mentioned, which are in perpetuity. We have Measure R, which is 30-year lifespan, $35 billion. It was $40 billion, but thanks to the recession, it's $35 billion. But we have a lot of creative things going on. We have 75 projects, close to 75 projects in LA County now that are in some degree of either preparation or construction, all because of Measure R. And in addition to that, the 15% local return that goes back to each city is generating local projects like pedestrian walkways, bike lanes, left-hand turn signals, ADSEC, intersections, doing all those things with the 15% that comes back to the locals. And because some of the cities are small, Metro has offered to pool the funds, help them. We put out planning grants for the smaller cities so they can, as a coalition or a COG, come together and make some decisions on pooling that 15% they each get back and doing transportation improvements at the local level. So it's working at all those levels right now. And we have we're about halfway through the top projects on that list. We had started, this is one of those great questions, and Denny and I have been through this. People say, do elections matter? As someone who lost one by 29 votes, I can say they do, but so does turning out to vote. But specifically, why this election? Let me show you how elections matter. When we first proposed when Measure R passed, and we first went back to Washington, our idea was to create a program where Washington would help us maximize local dollars. We went back knowing that DC didn't have any money, or the kind of money we need to solve some of these problems. So what we said was, look, we don't want you to give us the 80% you normally do. We're happy to take 20%, but let's develop this long-range program that you guarantee the back end. We have sales tax money that our voters have passed, allow us to accelerate that program and put people who work today and build these projects. And Washington said, well, wait a minute, back up. The part where you said you don't want the 80%, you'll take 20, confuses us, because nobody does that back here. And we don't have a box to check that says take less money and do it differently, even though it generates more money through the economic activity. And that took about a year and a half to explain to them in really short sentences how to make this happen. And by the way, when you were asked, I can't tell these stories. Laura's here, and I think that's great. She's a new reporter for the Times of Transportation, but I can't tell you the good stuff that Denny sort of alluded to. So you can either ask her to leave. No. One thing I will say, though, and you can read between the lines however you want, y'all need to really work on the LA congressional delegation. There are some very good leaders in the delegation. Henry Waxman just wrote a letter on positive train control, and Henry's always been there on clean air. But there are a lot of people in our congressional delegation who are supportive of what we do in transportation, but people don't die for transportation policy. People die for health care. People die for political, die for education, die for health care, choice. There are hot button issues that people treat as life and death issues. Transportation is something everybody supports until something they feel more important comes along, which is always part of the fight we have in funding. And you need to help us educate these congressional members. They need to pay attention to this stuff. One, because it's jobs in the community, but second, because the ability of people to get where they're going faster or with less pollution is a health issue as well as a transportation issue. In fact, one of the benefits, the major benefits of Measure R, it's almost like, Measure R is almost one of those, oh, and by the way, it improves mobility. Because Measure R has the ability to create, for the 13 mass transit projects that we want to do in 10 years instead of 30, it has the ability to create, I think the number was 690,000 jobs in that construction period in a city that still has, county that still has 10.2% unemployment. LA County, economic advisor yesterday said 10.2% still. In some parts of this community, it's much higher than that. Building trades is still close to 40%. There's recovery happening on Wall Street, but it hasn't filtered down yet. It's starting to, and you're seeing housing starting to come back on others, but we need the kind of jobs these projects can complete. And unlike other areas, these projects are shovel-ready here. We have projects that are good to go. This has taken so long in dealing with Congress that when we started, we thought we would need a measure. We both do CEQA and NEPA here, which in California is sort of redundant because CEQA is actually tougher than NEPA in a lot of areas. But you have to do both processes. There's a pilot project that Congress passed 5 years ago to do a joint CEQA-NEPA document for highway construction, but they didn't do it for transit, which made no sense. So we went back, and that was part of our ask to do this. It took so long for Congress to get their mind around what we were doing, and we completed the NEPA documents and the CEQA documents. So that's an issue that needs to be addressed long term, but it gives you an idea how long it took to get through this process in Washington. What we got out of the process, though, and Denny mentioned the TIF deal on our country, we went back asking for two things, basically. The mayor's proposal for 3010, which morphed into America Fast Forward at the national level, was that there are two parts to it. One was the TIFIA piece, and the second was the bonding piece. The TIFIA is a loan program that the government has that actually was designed, it was modeled after the Alameda Corridor project that was done in the 90s to connect the goods movement corridor from the Port of LA up to 110. The funding mechanism that was used, developed, morphed into what's now known at the national level as the TIFIA program. TIFIA had been funded previously at $125 million a year. The mayor's package that he took back did a number of things in terms of not only advocating which the President, Senator Boxer, and Congressman Micah, who at that point chaired the Transportation Committee in the House, all agreed to was to move TIFIA from $125 to $1 billion. TIFIA is a 10-to-1 program. So $1 billion greatly enhances nationally what you can do with TIFIA, but that's not the only thing we did. We changed the rules so you lock in the interest rate so that the interest rate can be consistent through the whole program. We did so well that the TIFIA loan we got on Crenshaw, for the Crenshaw line, is 2.47%. For the life of the project, it's 2.47%. It's 2.47%, and we don't even start drawing money for 3 years. So that means to the agency, from a cost-saving standpoint, you lock it in early, you save several $100,000 just on the financing, and you're good to go. That's a game changer in terms of locals putting up and how this program should work. That program will save, just on Crenshaw line alone, about $250,000 just the financing cost. And that's a huge, huge piece when you consider all the projects Denny had up on there before. We can do more if it costs us less, obviously. So that was the first piece of it. The second piece of it was the bond program, which would enable us to maximize the Measure R money over a longer period of time. Measure R really accelerated the first 10 years of the long-range transportation plan that Met has. Measure J was designed to accelerate the second and third decade. So we haven't been able to accelerate the second and third decade yet, but we have accelerated the projects in the first decade, which is why you have, Expo Phase 2, the Gold Line, the subway, the connector, Crenshaw, all these things moving right now. In fact, we are in line to get scheduled to get full funding grant agreements before the end of the year from the federal government for both the connector and the subway. Those are two large projects, and it's unusual for one city to get two projects of that magnitude, but we are in line to do that, having done a lot of homework and a lot of work in DC. And the mayor gets the bulk of the credit for doing that, because he kept going back. We all did. When people said it wouldn't happen, or you can't do that, or it doesn't make sense, we just didn't know enough to stop. And as a result of that, we went to China looking for money. We met with the Chinese Investment Corporation, CIC, 2 Decembers ago, looking for money. And said, great opportunity here. You guys don't need any rate of return because you've got billions sitting here. But what you do need is good PR in the United States, because right now we're in a trade war on solar, etc. Can we convince you to put money into these projects and the goodwill that will create for putting Americans back to work? And they said, yeah, we're interested in seats on the board of anything we invest in. I said, yeah, that won't go over real well back in LA. And then there's the Chinese seats on the board because they're the money. So that didn't, but we will go wherever someone is willing to talk reasonably about how to move people from point A to point B in a better way. The project that I think rivals the subway, as Denny said, for excitement, for those of us in the valley, the city does a lot of, everybody in the county, we do a lot of east-west stuff. We don't do a lot of north-south stuff. Ask anybody on the 405. Or the Whitnall Freeway that didn't happen, or the other ones that didn't cut through the mountains. They're not going to happen. The project that's currently on the 405 is a carpool lane and also a number of other fixes and modifications. And one of the things we've tried to do on this, which is unusual for government, is that the last Carmageddon weekend, in addition to the Carmageddon activities that took place there, Caltrans finished 14 separate other projects on the 405, on different parts of it, that would have had to be done post-Carmageddon had we not had that closed weekend. So they took that closed weekend, they finished 14 other projects not related to Carmageddon. Each of those projects together would have represented lane closures equaling approximately 7 weeks, had it been done during traffic. Did it all that same weekend. No fuss, no muss, nobody on the road, get it done and get out. The project has been slower than we like because it's hard doing projects like that. There are water pipes where the maps don't say they are. The engineers here know that there's always something down there that you don't expect or don't know about. But it's moving along, and we opened part of the carpool lane last week. In June, I think we'll be able to open it close to Wilshire. And so it's moving. And so that project's moving along. But the next one, the 405 Transit Reliever Project, as we call that, is designed for a 405 relief. It is the last project of the mass transit projects in Measure R. There's $1 billion in Measure R for it. But If we use that $1 billion, we have to wait till all the projects before it get started and are underway and nearing completion before we get to the last project. So we decided to take a gamble after running numbers and numbers and numbers. We believe that there's a potential there for this really unique, really cool signature type project, which will be essentially a tunnel that goes from around the Van Nuys Civic Center where the orange line comes in and State Building is in the middle of Van Nuys. Come out at the UCLA subway stop, be 2 decks, top deck mass transit vehicles, bottom deck probably 4 hot lanes. Hot lanes are toll lanes like we currently have on the 110 and the 10. Optional lanes. Toll lanes, but it's your choice. The smart people tell me that the numbers from the toll lanes can pay for the project. The reason we went that direction, and the reason I went for foregoing the $1 billion in public money, is A, the toll lanes can cover it, and B, it went from the last project to the next project. So last November and December, the MTA board authorized the start of the work with the industry, preparing what will eventually be a request for proposals. And we got all the we're still getting industry input back from a big industry session we had a couple weeks ago, where we laid out the program, what we want to do, and we're getting industry input back right now. There is interest in this project from around the world. Samsung flew 20 people over here last year to kick the tires to see if we were real. We were going to ask if they were real, but they flew 20 people over. We figured that makes it pretty real. They're not the only ones. There are consortiums forming up right now from companies around the globe for what will be a signature project, in that it's the longest and largest project like it. It's probably a $10+ billion project. It'll be done all as a public-private partnership, meaning design, build, maintain, finance, possibly operate. That last piece is a question mark still. And we, rather than have it complete in 2035 or 2036 or 2037, the schedule we've got right now, which started in 2012, would complete this in 2022 or 23. So that's, we're taking 13 years off when we expect that to be complete. That's a major game changer, because it also provides the first link in connecting, as Denny said, to LAX and eventually up to Palmdale. In 1985, Tom Bradley and I stood on top of one of those buildings in Sepulveda and Van Nuys and talked about building a high-speed train from LAX to Palmdale. So this is not a new idea, but we're further along with it than we ever have been before. And I'm very excited about this possibility, because it is a public-private partnership, because it is a signature project. We get a lot of attention, but it will bring your creativity of the world to bear on it. And that's one of the things we realized. We have very good people, as I said earlier, who work here. But RFPs, by their definition, are limited by sort of the information or knowledge that the person preparing the RFP has. And I'm not at all denigrating the person preparing the RFP. I mean, these are smart people. But you can inadvertently leave out a possibility or an option just by the language you choose in writing RFPs, and that's sort of an unintended consequence often in RFPs. So what we did was much like we did with Union Station. We're going to say to the industry, we're going to give more, if you would, performance specs, and let the industry tell us how they can get from point A to point B. Because we want people to be as creative as they possibly can. I don't want to take anything off the menu, and let us see the full array of talent about how we move people through this corridor. So this is something that will give the private sector a chance to show what they've got and what they can do. And the MTA to do this in a way that doesn't burden taxpayers. By the way, that $1 billion in Measure R stays in this same sub-region for projects. It doesn't go to other parts of the city. So we still get it in the valley and the west side, that $1 billion, but it will be used for other projects as needed farther down the road. This project will go off without taxpayer dollars and 10, 15 years earlier to completion than it would have otherwise. So it's an acceleration within the acceleration. So we're very, very excited about that. Last thing I'll say, and then we'll answer questions, and it goes back to challenge to you. I think groups like the Transit Coalition and MoveLA and a lot of groups in LA County are going to have a big role to play sooner than people think. You go back to the LRTP and the 30-year plan and stuff Danny was talking about. That 30-year plan is all predicated on these 12 projects, for instance, being built over the 30 years. No one anticipated, the crazy notion of building 12 of them at once. Yeah, because you build 12 of them, I guess 12, not 13, you build 12 of them at once, you're essentially dropping a system on LA County. You're taking that 10 or 12 year period, forgive me for the construction during that, would be a nightmare. But what we're doing at the end of it is connecting, we're creating connectivity and a system of rail and highway and carpool lanes and pedestrian walkways, bicycle lanes. It's a true multimodal system. Mayor Villaraigosa challenged everybody 8 years ago when he was sworn in to dream big. Everybody thought, oh, just Antonio dreams big, he likes to do that kind of stuff. Because the mayor is bold enough to dream big, we have this opportunity today. We will have turned in his 8 years as mayor from the car capital of the world, not to a transit capital, we're not there, but we will have taken the most car-centric capital anywhere probably in the world and made it a true multimodal transportation system that serves everybody at all corners of this county. And that's what the goal of the system is. So that's something that'll be exciting, but on that, I think the LRTP will need to be updated more often than it has been previously because the premises that were in place, build a project every 5 to 7 years, are no longer valid. If we complete these projects, that's 77 million people using mass transit a year, which means that your highway assumptions, your freeway, your roadway assumptions, your transit assumptions have to be re-examined, and the LRTP itself, I think, will need to be revisited as we get closer to completing these 12 rather than wait for it to run out, because some projects people thought might be needed in the 3rd decade may not be needed anymore. They may still be, but we need to take another look. So I appreciate all the support, your support from the Transit Coalition, from MoveLA, and from the voters in LA County, because the voters here, I got to tell you, and then I'll wrap up this, are as usual, ahead of the elected officials. You have some elected officials who are still trying to figure out how much stuff I can put in my backyard and claim credit for. Well, the voters, because they're actually on the road every day, driving themselves, know better. They know that just because I'm bottlenecked here doesn't mean the solution is here. People, and I know there's at least one person here from the 710 Coalition who will not be happy with this, but if you were to complete the 710 North, you take 20% of the traffic out of the 4 level in downtown Los Angeles the day it opens. You take 20% of the traffic out of the 4 level, you clean up the 101 and the 405, the 110 and the 10, the 10 and the 405, because it all starts from the 4 level and moves out every morning. And that's how it happens. It moves out every morning. That link that's missing, this is why I've supported 710 North. The link that's missing is the link that was designed to help people who are coming from north and west go east without going through the middle of the city of LA. Today, unless you take the 710, you have no way to do that. And we all know the result. It's interesting as you notice traffic patterns. It takes me longer today to come downtown at 5 o'clock than it is to come home from downtown at 5 o'clock. The reason being, you get on the 10, the 118, or the 101 in the morning, the traffic going east is just as heavy as the traffic going west. I mean, people are going both ways in this town. Thousand Oaks, Chatsworth, wherever it may be, Newhall. So we need a regional system here. 3010, Measure R, will get us that system. And we'll get at that system because the mayor not only had the vision, along with Pam O'Connor, who was mayor of Santa Monica at the time, and he had the impatience to say, I'd like to see some of this before I die. How do we do that? So, we're trying to put this in place so all of us can use it as fast as possible. So Bart, with that, be happy to take questions on this or anything else.
All right, we'll start with
Well, this question was, I think, asked either the last time or the time before a meeting. But that north-south transportation project in the valley, why would it only have to go as far as the orange line and not the Van Nuys Metrolink station?
North line and the Van Nuys, we're talking, well, first, we're talking that same area, right there,
Yeah.
on Van Nuys Boulevard. The Metrolink station is right where the orange line are virtually the same place.
Well, it's further north.
Further north. It all depends on how the engineers can get, there's a station that crosses Van Nuys at the big box down where the UAW plant is, where the auto works plant used to be. There's a considerable distance in there. There's a distance issue, but it's one of the things that we're asking people to look at, because we're also at the same time considering doing a BRT in the valley. We're looking at the next section life of BRTs in the valley, one potentially up Van Nuys, maybe Lancashire, some people say St. Paul, but I think more likely Van Nuys, and how we link it all together there. So all that's an open question still.
I just want to mention one other thing quickly. The Chinese investment group, I just think they're just being good politicians. I think, you know, don't expect different.
Yeah, well, it's probably customary to make a major investment in a corporation, and you take a seat on the board.
I would think
They don't understand democracy and a public vote, because they don't have it.
well, yeah, but I'm saying if the money has to follow it.
Well, it's a return on investment issue, or, you know, it all depends on how you want to measure your ROI, your return on investment. You can measure it in dollars, or you can measure it in good public relations. And in a global setting sometimes, if you got money, if you have all of our money to start with, and then others on top of it, you may need public relations more than you need more money.
I have just a bunch of current topics. I'm wondering if you could talk about. First is Metro board appointments, dream choices, or possibilities you might think is in the area.
Richard Katz?
No idea. It's going to be, this is the new mayor. You know, both candidates who ran for mayor have, you know, transportation. They both know transportation. It wasn't a high priority in the campaign. Didn't hear much about it from either in the campaign. So I think we're all looking. I know Eric favors mass transit. He supports mass transit. He supports creative ways and innovative ways to do things. So I think a lot of the new things we're looking at with, you know, PDAs and nothing but payments and a variety of other things are kind of be likely to embrace. But I think it'll also embrace a transit future. We just don't know yet.
What about the Caltrans review that was initiated? ETH,
It's transportation economics.
yeah, has converted to a study, a review of Caltrans.
Oh, the study.
Towards that, yeah, unification of all the transportation
BT,
to some new.
Yeah, I'm not sure
I'm
what
more
they're doing.
interested in the results, what you guys think would be the outcome,
I don't know.
and what they want to do
Well,
as a result of
I don't know.
There's been a lot of talk of devolving. There's been a lot of talk of devolving Caltrans into a more local agency function. Some people talk about breaking them up and just keeping it as an O&M agency since we're not building major highways in the urban centers. But we are doing some in the outlet. Metro is doing on Highway 158 a goods movement corridor that we're building through the north of southern San Joaquin, North LA County to keep trucks from coming into Los Angeles. That's a 3P project that's also going out for bid. But I don't know what the goal of the study is. I don't know what, you know, there's their stated goal of efficiency, but I don't know what the real agenda is there, other than, you know, maybe, it's hard to say.
I'm a local guy. Don. I do local politics.
I'm sorry, Bert.
John
I was
Lau.
also back.
Yeah,
Hey, John.
someone mentioned the lack of a core funding source for Metrolink. What do you see as the likely prospect for that?
It's hard, right? Metrolink is funded right now by, Metrolink serves 5 counties, Ventura, LA, San Bernardino, Orange, and Riverside. And the board's made up of delegations from each of those. The LA delegation is Antonovich, Kanabe, Ridley Thomas, and myself. That's the progressive delegation on the board. Okay, there's 4 other delegations. That's the progressive one. So that's something you need to know that. Just for perspective. We've talked to people, and I think the best chance for that would be some sort of funding out of DC for intercity rail or commuter rail that was tied to an AB 32 type program or greenhouse gas reduction program. We talked to Congressman Waxman about that. We talked to the White House about if you're going to do greenhouse gas reduction and there's revenue generated, much like cap and trade, then we think a lot of that ought to go into transportation infrastructure. And so that's what we're pursuing.
I think there's a lot of commuter rail systems lack that funding source. So.
The Bay Area has sponsored legislation that would create for the MPOs in the Bay Area the opportunity to have a multi-county ballot measure to accomplish just that sort of unified funding for regional systems. That measure could be, if political leadership are willing, could be amended to permit a similar multi-county measure in Southern California. And if that were to happen, one of the ingredients could be a core funding source for regional systems like MetroLink. So that, a template for that is it's been made a 2-year bill, so we're going to be looking at it in the second year of this session and talking with folks at Sandbag and Metro about whether there's a play there for us as well. We do know that San Bernardino County people are thinking about 2016 ballot measures. Metro, I hope they're thinking about 2016 ballot measures. At minimum, there's an opportunity for a coordinated program on the portions of the system that are shared between the counties in each of those measures, where you do X, we do Y, you do Z, we do, that sort of stuff that could be very compelling for the portions of the system in those counties. And then, frankly, if Riverside wanted in, why not? But somebody has to sort of take the lead and create the new model. Well, it's just a political choice, right? It's not that complicated, really. You just got to get people to agree.
Well, part of it, part of that was the legislation last year on the Los San corridor, trying to create, a unified approach in the Los San corridor, which has gone nowhere because North County Transit in San Diego has been blocking everything. And I think, frankly, that ought to be a MetroLink corridor. I think we ought to run the corridor. And with all due respect to our guest from Amtrak, I think they ought to be out of the corridor. They're not a commuter railroad. They shouldn't have 5 o'clock slots at a Union Station. They're not a commuter railroad. They're a long-distance haul, and we appreciate that. And I think Amtrak and MetroLink have ways to work together. Didn't appreciate earlier this year when Amtrak went to Caltrans and came up with a scheme to use public taxpayer money to undercut MetroLink prices on tickets. Thought predatory pricing among public agencies was a bad thing, not something we should be doing. The director of Caltrans finally put a stop to it. But I do think we have more than we need in the corridor from an efficiency standpoint and also just from a safety standpoint. This is a very heavily congested corridor. It's actually 510 miles, but it's a very heavily congested corridor between UP, between BNSF, Amtrak, Metro, MetroLink, a lot of stuff going on.
Jason Ackerman?
So why are we content to talk about a BRT on Van Nuys? Why not really dream big and talk about light rail from UCLA to all of the medical centers, not just the Stillman MetroLink station, but push it all the way to all of you and pick up mission callers on the way. And you should have a single north-south trip through the valley on rail and grade separate as much as possible. And I'm also trying to figure why we're not talking about like the Orange Line as a final project, because in my mind, it's just the start, because what we really need to do is grade separate the Orange Line at every possible spot and put it on rails. So why aren't we dreaming that kind of big for the valley?
A couple $1 billion short VM will do all that. And that's really the problem. The discussion between BRT, light rail, subway is all driven by ridership. And though people in different parts of town don't believe that, it really has to do with ridership. And what's driving some transportation planning here and spending more money than we need to in areas is they have it, I want it. I had that conversation with the deputy in the legislator's office in the valley who said, they got a subway, why can't I have a subway? You don't have a ridership for a subway, for starters. And we don't, and it is a dollar and cents question. Now, the Orange Line obviously been wildly successful. We have a dilemma now. Because we actually tried to be smart. When we built the Orange Line, the road bed is prepped already for light rail. We designed it for light rail. What we haven't figured out yet is what to do with the 30,000 people a day who use it when you convert it to while you're trying to convert it to light rail. You can't shut it down for 2 years or a year. So we're trying to figure out how do you do one of those, one lane here, one lane there kind of things, or how because it's getting close to light rail numbers. And the big question for us though is just physically, how do you do it and not disrupt those 30,000 people that depend on it now? So that's our challenge on that one.
The mighty thing we could solve if we were to have a ballot measure which provided funding for 2016.
Wait.
Next, no, we have.
Oh, sorry.
Jose Palma, then Luca, then Neil Vernon.
I'll just stand up. Continuing with that, you know, I really believe that we need to find a way to make sure that light rail is possible in the valley. You know, the ridership might not be there, but you yourself talk about multimodality, and that really doesn't work very well with the Orange Line. So maybe if we had light rail instead of the Orange Line, there would be a better multimodality.
Why does it not work at Motel?
Well, me and my friend
Hollywood Red Line Station.
Me and my friend Jorge, he worked with me on a project where we were evaluating multimodality on the Metro Orange Line. And there's just a lot of potential, and you know, the Orange Line does work, and it's kind of reaching its limit in engineering, right? But still, I think there's an opportunity there that you might be missing, because then if you do BRT for, you know, the East Valley corridor, then you have to shut down one again, right? So you don't want to make the same mistake twice. But you just want to encourage more people to use it, because the Valley usually, you know, it's people that really still stick to their cars, I believe. And if you're kind of encourage them to really adopt a different form, there may be
What we find is the way you encourage people to adopt a different form is you have to give them options.
Well, that's the thing.
And that's how many options, you know, our goal is to present the commuter with as many options as possible. And that's what, you know, I used to joke with people, and I still think it's so important. Let me ask, how many of you weren't born in LA? We're not born in LA. Okay, I do that so that
We're the problem.
I just want you to understand, all you transportation guys, for those of us who were born here, you are the problem. But the reason I mention it, the reason I mention it is, y'all came here for a reason. And people continue to come here for a reason. Because it's 80 degrees out here when everybody else gets tornadoes and, you know, it's fun to death. And people realized, about a bunch of years ago, folks realized, you know, it was interesting, about 5 years ago, I think, there was a shift out when Denny was talking about how things started changing. Because people always said, well, I can go somewhere else. Well, I think what they realized, there's traffic somewhere else, too. I'm going to move to Atlanta, bumper to bumper. I'm moving to New York. Are you nuts? I'm moving to Chicago. I'm moving, you know, there's traffic everywhere. The difference is here, you can have the top down when you're stuck in traffic. Or, it's the lifestyle, it's the weather, it's all those things that bring people to California. It continues to bring people here. And we have to understand that, you know, even the days when Jerry Brown in Jerry Brown 1.0 said, you know, don't build it, they won't come. So we built no freeways, and no one stopped coming, unfortunately. So it's a question of presenting options.
The next one is Luke.
Oh, right here, I'm sorry.
Yeah, look,
Yeah, so, lost my train of thought. For the line, well, is that an actual, for the line that runs from Van Nuys to UCLA, are they going to put it under the 405 or adjacent to the 405, or?
It'll be underground in the area of the 405. I don't know that it'll be right under the 405, but it'll be underground. That'll start in Van Nuys and come out at UCLA. It'll be underground in that area based on what the geology says is the best way to go.
Oh, okay, so the next stop would be from, well, I don't know, somewhere in Sherman Oaks probably to UCLA.
Don't know yet. I mean, it could be, there could be 2 stops in the valley or 1 stop in the valley and then UCLA.
Okay, and is it planned, you said it's planned to end at the Van Nuys Government Center?
Right now, we're talking about the 2 connection points right now are the government, in the vicinity of the government center and UCLA subway stop.
Oh, okay.
Neil.
Yeah, Richard, a quick question. Don't you think a megapolis like LA should have more subways? Because, you know, that's what leads to change. North Hollywood, Studio City, Hollywood, you know, and even downtown LA languished for years till the metro came in, Metro Red Line.
Yeah, I think there are areas that it's appropriate. I mean, you look at the ridership and the density on Wilshire, and you know you need to run a subway to go from downtown, from the western terminus now. If you're going to go, I call it the subway towards the sea at this point. But, you know, if you're going that way, you need to go through those heavily dense areas. It's the only way to do it. In other areas, like rail, I think is appropriate. I think it's more, if you look at what's happened around some of the east side stations, there are now businesses growing there that after failed attempt after failed attempt, because the ridership is up as well. I mean, it's a synergy of all of it.
But I think where appropriate, subway is great, but I don't think you need to build subway, which is so significantly more expensive than anything else. We don't need to do it everywhere.
But it generates growth. Very often the patronage between here and North Hollywood wasn't great till we.
But I think it also generates growth. But see, a subway like we're talking from Van Nuys, or a tunnel rather, from Van Nuys to Westwood, you're not going to have a lot of stops.
No,
So that's just a straight shot. It's like the channel, England and France. But where it's appropriate, yes, and where we get money for it, yes.
In the back, there was Mary.
Yes, I just want to echo the feelings for light rail in the valley. I'm a valley girl. I was born and raised here, okay? And I was...
That's two of us at least.
Three. So extremely disappointed when we were given these buses. And to me, and I have friends who live in the West Valley, and we have now Lindley's in Elko, so, so now I see that. They don't like driving out to Monaco. It's like 14, 16 miles from Northwood. And I said, well, if we had the red car, if we had light rail, but that's a whole different story, but, I'm not going to drive and I'm not going to take that bus.
Yeah,
now, that's not the end of it, because I have a nephew that lives in North Hollywood, and he'd like to be going out to see sun, and he'd like to take his bike. And so currently there are 3 bicycles per bus. So what's the point at all about saying this is for everybody? Because it's not. It's not for our children that want to go to CSUN, et cetera, or Pierce, or wherever else. So for me, and I feel slighted, and I have to say that to the valley, and I think we all do. I think we were shortchanged on this. We have, 40% of the population, or whatever it is, and we have buses.
Well, I hate to tell you this, but the Valley has only itself to blame for being shortchanged, in your words. There were those of us who for years advocated for subway and light rail in the Valley, and all sorts of Valley elected officials and constituent groups campaigned against it. In fact, there was a state senator who put a ban on underground in North Hollywood with the support of, but I'm saying, no, wait a minute. I'm saying the reason, I'm sorry? The reality is that we tried for a long time. When I was in the legislature, even before I got elected, we tried for a long time for both light rail in the valley and subway. And there was no demonstrable support from constituencies for it. There was limited. I shouldn't say no, there was limited. And that's why the BRT happened, which has been a huge step. I'd love to do more light rail in the valley. I think we should be doing it.
Well, let's try it again, because I think we have a population now that really cares.
Well, that goes back to Measure J and what Denny's been talking about, but I agree with you.
Absolutely.
I think what we hear from Richard is no resistance to that idea. He, if anything, has been, over decades an advocate for those sorts of things. And the reason you got what you got was a combination of political opposition and not enough support in the valley, as well as lack of financial resources. If the valley constituency, now is going to champion those ideas, it can be part of a subsequent measure. Frankly, in Measure J, some parts of the valley, like the West Valley, were one of the weaker parts of the vote. If we were able to put together the system that showed, valley residents, voters, that they were getting, a much more robust system, maybe we could win that share of the vote back.
And what I was going to say along that line, I said what you ought to be doing, if that's your priority, is communicating with your city council members and your supervisors. The supervisors all sit on the MPA board, and the new mayor, that as discussions take place at the MTA about new revenue sources or expanding, you want this to be part of it. They need to hear that now. This is the time to be doing that when people are talking about what we should be doing in the next phase.
Okay, we will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moody. Yeah, thank you for coming. I've been following for a while. I'm a little leery of supply side options for people. I'm really interested in the changing of land use that would, force is not a good word to use, and I'm grappling for one right now, but to encourage people to take transit would be dropping parking minimums and building denser around the transit stations. So, I mean, without those, if you continue building two spaces for every household unit, why would anybody, and widening the roads, why would anybody ever take transit?
Well, the other part is, I don't think we actually build more parking spaces. What they do is they just stripe each one smaller and say you have more of them. You know, I mean, you ever try to get the car in some of those spaces? It's crazy.
But it's
no,
dropping
you're exactly-
parking minimums and changing land use around transit parking.
We don't have land use authority. I'd love to have that, but we don't. City councils do. But when I wrote the original congestion management program for the state, what we did is say that, you know, we required all sorts of mitigation for new construction, et cetera. If you were building within, I think it was a quarter mile or a half mile of a transit hub, you had an exemption from all those other mitigation requirements as an incentive to build density around transit hubs. And the city of LA is doing some similar things now, because you're right, you need to encourage, the other bad word in LA is density, because everybody thinks it means next door to me. But you need density around transit hubs. What makes LA so hard is that there are places that are as sprawled as we are, but not as dense. And there are places that are as dense, but not as sprawled. But there's nowhere that's as sprawled and dense as we are, which is why everybody else, all the other major cities in the world, everyone starts out here in the morning and goes to here, and then about 4:30 starts running back out there. And that makes it easy to devise a system, because everybody's going, somebody said to me, why don't you have, like they do in the Bay Area and some other areas, those movable center lanes, so in the non-congested hours, you can shift to the other side. And I said, okay, show me the non-congested hours that we're going to do that. But that's part of the problem, because people are, like we talked about the morning commute, everybody's going in both directions. And that's what makes it so hard. But yes, there should be greater density around transit hubs. We all in LA, I joke that I support mass transit. I support mass transit, so Anil uses it, gets out of my way on the freeway. That's the first reason we support it. The second thing we like to say in LA is, of course I want mass transit, but it's got to be convenient, which I define as within 2 blocks of my house. And oh, by the way, you cannot build it in my backyard, which I define as 3 blocks from my house. Now go build me a system, and I'll use it. That's what we're dealing with here. But it is changing, because there are more and more people with your point of view, and we're hearing that more and more, and I think the plans have to reflect that. And I think Garcetti is a good opportunity, particularly from a land use. He's a planner, he loves planning and land use, that side, to push that idea of density where appropriate around transit hubs, and not necessarily in residential neighborhoods, but put it where people have access to mass transit.
Todd and Gerhard, has there been any idea of having Olympic one-way and Pico one-way, and having a bike lane?
Yes.
And a bus lane?
The
Why
mayor-
not do it? Let's do it.
The mayor tried to do it. He had a proposal to turn Pico into one way and Olympic in the other. The other thing, if you ever, you fly over the valley, you talk about the north-south grid, just waiting. He was sued on a CEQA lawsuit, some of the homeowners in Cheviot Hills, in Rancho Park area, took him to court because there wasn't a full-blown EIR done on restriping to one-way streets. And the court said, you gotta go back and do a whole full-blown EIR. And it sided with the homeowners, and it has not moved since then. But I mean, it's crazy. I think, I don't know that you should do it all one way, but I would do, I'd take 4 one way to the other on both of them, and do one way and the other way. But that's what held up. There's a new proposal that some people are working on now to try and do a series of one-way parallel streets in different parts of the city that right now, Hillary Norton's group FAST is in fact working on. Gerhard.
I want to first congratulate you. I think what you guys did in terms of transit is fantastic in LA. But what I also want to mention is the missing link here is...
Couldn't stop after that, you gotta say slide. Come on, man. Give me a break.
Fantastic period. The missing link to me is that we're still pursuing transit planning and land use, urban planning, separate, the disconnection. You mentioned that, in a joking way, the city wanted to do their own thing. But that's a huge impediment. I mean, you're talking about missing ridership. That's how you generate ridership, right?
That's it.
The Chinese built a train somewhere. They built, apartments there. They have the ridership. They finances the line. They keep going. We have no such thing.
Well, they also don't have CEQA.
Yeah.
Not like we have, William Mulholland and Robert Moses would both shoot themselves today rather than build something. I think.
Yeah, well, and the answer, the explanation is we got a democracy. and people were either wrong with either yay or nay.
Remember, when China wanted to build Seven Gorges Dam, they just moved a couple million people out of the way or told them, go by Thursday or we're flooding the place, you know. Wouldn't be able to quite, it's a little different situation.
Couldn't there be a regional integrated planning body?
There is.
Transportation and zoning.
People, you know, the problem with it is, I agree with you in an ideal world, I agree. What happens is, there should be a regional body that does it. Nobody at a city level wants to give up any authority. And nobody wants to create another level of government on top of what we already have. And everyone's always paranoid about what might happen. There's a development, a transit-oriented development at Sepulveda and Pico, which right now is a Conrock facility. Across the street from the lumber yard on one side, the county building on the other. There's a proposal to put a transit-oriented development in place of the concrete plant. And there are neighbors in the area who say, no. What do you mean, no? You have a concrete plant. And yes, but I know the concrete plant, and I know the developer says it'll be better afterwards, but I don't know that it'll be better afterwards. You go, but you live next door to a concrete plant. 1% of global warming is caused by concrete plants in the world. And you have to wash your car twice a day. You live next to a concrete plant. And they say, yes, but I'm used to it and I know it.
I want to intervene here. I've been a local government guy myself, and I have a bit of a different view about some of this. You know, there's no question that having higher density around transit stops will have a salutary beneficial effect on transit ridership, and will even have a beneficial effect upon regional mobility, regional emissions, but it also has significant new traffic impacts on local communities, which is where most of the decision-making is done. So if we don't find a strategy, I mean, believe me, it is not a strategy to just call them NIMBYs, and we're going to roll over it, because they have got more political power on the local level, and they've got a good reason to feel upset, because there is more traffic. We need to have a strategy to deal with the local traffic generations around those, and so far, the transit and land use planning discussion is dismissive of the local concerns, and if you don't get serious about the local concerns, you will never untie that political Gordian knot.
Totally
But
correct.
there
I'm
are
not suggesting
strategies to
rolling
do
over
that.
anybody. I'm just
sorry?
suggesting solving it.
No, but my point
Addressing
is,
it as a big picture and solving it. Nobody needs to be rolled over.
Okay, the next one is Matt, then Barbie, then Gloria, and then I forgot, Vince. Okay, that's the next one.
This is kind of a comment / question, I guess, but going back to density, I think it's actually one of the great strengths of Los Angeles is that is the distribution of density, and that it's dense without feeling that dense. And it does create challenges for transit, but it also creates opportunities that are not available for other cities. And so if we look at the success of the Orange Line, it creates opportunities that don't have to be on the Orange Line corridor. It can be on Ventura Boulevard, it can be on Sherman Way, it can be in other places. So that's a strength of Los Angeles, I think.
I agree, no, I agree with you. And you certainly don't want Los Angeles to wind up looking like Manhattan, just towers and towers and towers and towers. Except in, you have downtowns or you have Warner centers, but the neighborhoods will still be neighborhoods. One of the things when you're talking about areas that help, there's something we need to get changed in Congress, and we could use your help on that. And it's what's referred to in Congress as the $1 rule. In the federal government system, if there is a single dollar of federal money in a project, then federal rules apply to that project. It could be a $5 billion project, but if it's got $1 of federal money, federal rules apply. And among the federal rules that apply is a prohibition on local jobs. You can't go after specifically local jobs and say that 50% of the jobs from this project are going to be given to people that live in the city of Los Angeles. The federal government doesn't like that and has a prohibition on it because on their theory is gas tax dollars are paid by everybody in the country. So everybody in the country ought to be able to bid on a project, whether it's a construction company and whoever, labor, whatever, they ought to all be able to bid, not necessarily in the area where the people are paying the taxes. We've argued back in Washington that
without taking on the $1 rule and getting that, if we're putting up 80% of the money, why are we still governed by the $1 rule? Any project over 50% local funding should be able to hire at least 50% of the people locally. Now, you can do a very complicated employment plan and a project labor agreement, which we have here at the MTA, but it's a lot harder on employers and people seeking work. And the notion of changing this rule so that where there is significant local money is also an incentive for locals to pass sales tax measures, then leverage against the federal government. Because I think the beauty of AFF in 3010 is the recognition that feds aren't going to have tons of money in the foreseeable future, so how do we make better use out of the few dollars we have, and how do we leverage it? What better campaign way to go locally and say we can build all these projects, and guess what? 50% of the jobs have to be for people who live in the city of LA or the county of LA, you know, in helping to pass it, but also just leave politics aside, just equity. If you're paying on the taxes, why shouldn't you be able to get part of the jobs? And so we could use your help in educating members of Congress on the $1 rule, and at least where local agencies like ours are putting up half the money, that should be modified. Barb, please.
Yes, I'm very concerned. I really love everything that you're talking about, and I especially like the one about light rail. And in the valley, already I can think of other streets that you could use instead of...
Big tree shooting away.
Right, exactly, that would work. But I'm also concerned about the light rail. I like light rail because I don't want buses, I don't want pollution. I really would like to see most of it in light rail everywhere. How good is that possibility, and can it be connected to solar? I mean, because that solar panel's right on top of the...
Right now, we don't run any diesel buses out of the MTA. Ours are all CNG. We had the first CNG fleet in the world. We started it back when engines were still blowing up. And last year we charged the last diesel bus. We currently have a pilot project that we are collecting. Actually, bids are coming in on electric buses, and a variety, both electric and gear ratios, and a variety of ways to do things differently. So we have that underway right now, because now that we have them all CNG fleet, we're looking to the next generation.
Right.
So we're in the process of doing that. We put all of our maintenance facilities are now adding solar on all the roofs. So we've got a sustainability program here that Pam O'Connor, Mayor of Santa Monica, currently Mayor? Past Mayor Santa. Pam O'Connor started, but she's on the board also. And that's part of that sustainability is solar everywhere.
That's great.
No, not you. Gloria.
Okay, so that public-private partnership, the 405 project, so groovy. How come we aren't doing more of that? Is it because, is there something special about that corridor? Is it because there's so much traffic that the toll road would reap a lot of revenue? Two-part question.
Yeah, of course.
So, do public-private partnerships work, really? I mean, I think that, I always think of toll roads, like the Orange County tollway, that went under, and then taxpayers end up having to bail the project out. So, curious, sounds great. Are there other projects that we could do, but do they really work?
Public-private partnerships are being done extensively around the world and have been 10, 15, 20 years. The United States was slow to it. Partially, that's partially a labor issue. Partially also, what's called 3P was called privatization at one point, and then Reagan fired all the air traffic controllers in the name of privatization, and the term got, labeled forever. So it's been around, but the concept of 3Ps, what we call 3P, public-private partnerships in transportation, are being done extensively in other parts of the country, but around the world they're doing it quite successfully.
So, are it only the 405?
Well, no, we're 405 and a highway bundle that we're doing up on of about $1 billion worth of highway projects. So these are our first two going out like this, and we hope that these will be a prototype for a lot more in the future.
But no other transit.
We don't have any other transit or highway that are private right now, but we will. We will. Where did Mark go? Mark's not here, let's have a coup. Oh, here, Mark.
Want to ask your question?
Did that? Who was that? How about our visitor from Amtrak?
Well, Vince and then Justin and then Sharif.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what is the vision that you have? I know there's been some conceptual friction, I guess I'll call it, between commuter rail and intercity rail in LA, San Diego. And assuming you could get past the political roadblock of San Diego County, that wasn't there, and you were ready to roll.
It's actually just North County, not San Diego County.
Which is in between, it's kind of
Right.
like.
It's always the one in the middle.
Yeah, what is the vision of what you would think would be different? I mean, what kind of train ride would you expect a passenger to take going Los Angeles to San Diego, or even more better question, Santa Barbara to San Diego? A Metrolink train, non-reclining seats, no food service, or something else?
No, I think the 97% on time that Metrolink has versus the 65% on time that Amtrak has would be a good place to start.
But you're not envisioning that passengers going Santa Barbara to San Diego will have an option for a train experience,
They will have
not commuter rail.
They will have. I'm not going to get the pissing match with Amtrak right now. No, I appreciate that, but you know, most of the food on Amtrak's crap and the services, so don't promote it. But our trains, you know, if we run Santa Barbara to San Diego, there'll be a bar cart, there will be food on the trains, we'll do all that stuff.
So you would still envision an intercity type experience for the longer trips?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
But we're not going to compete with you on long haul. That's your area, not ours.
By long haul, what does that mean?
Amtrak
San
goes to
Francisco
San Francisco to Colorado. We're not. That's not our thing. Just intercity. Just commuter.
The Sun needs a football game on the train too.
Who's next?
Walker.
High sales tax voter thresholds require excellence from campaigns and from programs proposed, and Measure J obviously came very, very close. Should we be concerned about a flood of less well thought out measures and competing measures if we lower the threshold?
Hasn't happened. I mean, voters. I don't think elected officials give voters enough credit. Voters are pretty good at figuring out good from bad. Not all the time, but but I think on the most part, voters get it right. And I think back years ago, there were 5 measures on the ballot, 2 put on having to do with car insurance. There was like 101 and 102 were by the insurance industry, and 104 and 105 were by the trial lawyers, and 103 was done by a grassroots group in favor of lower insurance rates, etc. Millions of dollars spent on 1 and 2 and 4 and 5, nothing spent on 3, and 3 won overwhelmingly because the voters figured it out. I think voters can figure this stuff out, and I think that it's a question of the quality of the measures put together. We lost, as Denny said, I think, if the turnout had been even 5 points greater, we would have won. It was a 69% turnout versus 80% turnout. It's a turnout question. And that's why we lost it.
But there's a fundamental issue of democratic equity. I mean, I suppose the 33% who vetoed the 2/3, the 66% of the voters will imagine themselves have a superior judgment. That is not necessarily the case, and I think it's presumptive to suggest that that would be the typical outcome.
Well, but I think voters still, I like letting voters decide stuff. I'm not afraid of letting voters decide.
And so why not a supermajority that's more reasonable supermajority?
And I come down where Denny does on that. I mean, the way I grew up, you get 50% plus 1, you win something generally. Not a pat on the back, but we're sitting here looking at 66.6, with 66.1, which, in LA County in the middle of a recession, is a staggering number of voters all saying yes to something. And it's frustrating that we can't do anything. Which is why I think
Measure J, where the fall off from Measure R occurred, it was overwhelmingly in the affluent, more Republican, more white communities, and in the South Bay and the West Valley, etc. And so, it creates an opportunity, I think, for an unhealthy kind of sort of class rivalry that I think ought to be avoided. Majority votes can help to avoid that.
Yeah, the Democratic turnout in the presidential year in November is always 10% higher than it is 2 years earlier in gubernatorial elections. And Democratic voters, and it's a geographic, demographic split, as well as party. Republican voters, older, more conservative, also vote in greater numbers. Democratic voters, This was the Obama wave that we saw in 2008. Young voters who usually don't vote in big numbers. Ethnic voters who don't vote necessarily in as large a number. Both voting in 08 in larger numbers than previously. And that bringing a different wave into the election. That did not reoccur in the Obama re-elect. And, you know, and as a result, you had different turnout in 12 than you did in 08. And that 11 points was primarily, in fact, the best way, we were watching, for those of you who may have been watching it with us, is it changed, you know, it started at 63, 64, 65, so it kept going up and up and up and up. And at one point I thought it was sort of weird because we were getting ballot reports where we got 75%, we'd never gotten above 63% on election night or in the immediate ballots afterwards. And what the pollsters and the number counters were explaining was that those ballots that were coming in very late were last-minute mail ballots or provisional ballots that were damaging the poll, and they tend to come from lower socioeconomic groups, they tend to come from younger voters or variety of that Democratic base. So it made sense to them that we'd be winning 75-25 in those. And it sort of makes the case that if more of the similar voters had turned out, you know, we would have picked up the 15,000 votes we need.
Well, the other tragedy, I think, of a 2/3 requirement is that agencies simply don't try because they presume defeat. I mean, you know, there was a grassroots movement that urged Metro to try in 2008 precisely because we knew that that particular election was going to have a special turnout. But, you know, it had been 20 years since Metro had gone, nearly 20 years since Metro had gone to the ballot. If you look around the state of California, you know, agencies, whether it's schools, cities, transportation agencies, etc., don't even try to go to the voters. So, you know, the sort of better deliberative planning simply does not take place because they don't even think it's an option.
And by the way, when they lowered school bonds to 55, and not all of them passed. Some of them are still defeated, so that everything passed in a scenario that some people had feared has not happened. Voters have made decisions that some have passed and some haven't.
I mean, things didn't always pass when we had a 50% requirement. I mean, in 1980, you barely got 50.1. 1990, you got 50.6.
Thank you. Sheree Crawford?
Yes, I do. For the 3P procurement.
I'm sorry?
For the 3P procurement. I understand that you are establishing a bench at this time for 3P procurement?
Yeah, it's separate, it's not the 405 transit way, but
But you're establishing a bench for 3P procurement.
The person who knew the answer was my
Just left.
slider, and he just left.
I'm not aware.
Herb may know the answer.
No, there is one being established.
There was a technical assistance bench to assist Roger Montgomery's group to come up with effective strategies.
On this one, on the 405 or?
No, they're separate. They're separate.
Okay.
So my question is, and you might not know this answer, is if anybody in here has ever looked at a proposal for Metro, there is a considerable amount of forms, depending on whether it's Metro or some other. Now, when a 3P company then is taking over that project, are they going to be, what is that RFP going to look like? Is it going to look just like how you would do for, you know?
It may not be an RFP, that was what I was saying earlier, maybe an RFQ and then competitive negotiation afterwards. It could be something designed around availability payments, it could be a number of different options. But we're not at that point yet, that's at least a year away.
Okay.
But those are all good questions that need to be answered and we're not that far in that process.
Okay.
But
Eric?
Yeah, so in LA County, about half of all trips are less than 3 miles, so that's probably too short to even get on a regional transit system. And right around, I think, 85% of people access the Metro system by walking and biking. But currently, Metro only spends about 1% of its budget on pedestrian bicycle projects. So I guess I'm kind of curious as to what Metro as the regional transportation agency's role is in both first mile, last mile, and honestly, sustainable communities really are about those local trips.
the bike, we decide, while we have a bike program we're incorporating at Metro, most of the bike money, though most of the bike work is done by the cities through that 15% local return. We thought
that was much more appropriate for the cities because that's a local land use, local traffic decision on where to put them and how. So we have worked with local cities, but that's where most of the large bike lanes come from. The city of LA's got a robust bike program now. Some say they wish the mayor had broken his arm 3 years earlier. And it might have been, we might be 3 years farther down the road now. But that's done mostly at the local level. By the way, Metrolink though, unlike Amtrak actually, Metrolink actually encourages bike riding. Amtrak, you don't have to make a reservation with your bike. We have a series of cars that are designed for bicycles, where you can put numbers of them on there. I think about 30 of our cars right now are outfitted for bikes. Other questions? Sure.
Well, since you brought it up, thank you. I have been, one thing I got first on last time, the word bus hasn't crossed in discussions at all, is light rail without that. You know, it's very hard to take your 5 on a light rail, you all know the bus challenges through I live in Pasadena, working on rail.
Laura's legal to say the rest of the stuff now. Now we can talk about the good stuff.
I'd love to take light rail as a commuter. I can't live 5.5 miles from the stop to my destination.
That's always been the problem in LA. You know, when the Northridge earthquake happened in '94 and the I-514 went down, it's one of the reasons because it went out with transit in the middle of the freeway. When the I-5 and 14 went down, if Metrolink had been on that, we would have lost that too. But we found it served a great purpose, obviously, for a lot of people, but the last mile was still a problem because you get off at a Metrolink stop in Silmar or in Burbank, and you work in Warner Center or Universal, that is still the problem in LA. It's the first mile, last mile. And we are trying to be creative about how to do it. It's hard to do because of the sprawl issue we talked about earlier. And most people don't live near, you're not a block away from the transit side. So that's a land use issue that goes way back. There's a city planner in LA in '74 named Cal Hamilton who designed the city center concept, which was in an area as sprawled as this, you could have multiple downtowns. So you have Westchester, Century City, downtown, Crenshaw, Warner Center, all those different downtowns. And his plan that he brought before the city council in '74 also had transportation links to all of it. You may not see those transportation links today because, surprise, surprise, the city council didn't do any of it. They did the development side, but they didn't do the transit side, which is why it's so hard to go back and catch up, because you can't go where you want to go without uprooting a lot of people out of their homes or their businesses at this point. So you're sort of, it's not like you can build from scratch, where you do it differently and have that first mile, last mile is a lot easier to address if you're starting from scratch. So we're trying to sort of paste it together with what we've got and are looking for ideas and suggestions about better ways to do it, because we haven't solved anything.
Besides buses?
Besides buses. Well, we have different versions. We have Dash, which is for shorter within Warner Center Dash, downtown half Dash. There's a number of places on the west side. I mean, there's Dash in different parts, so it's circulation within, and even within Century City, the TMO is putting together some of this. Local communities. Well, we fund that.
Well, I don't know whether Richard's willing to stay around a minute, but Denny's got an important...
I got a dinner date at 9:30, so...
Finally! Finally! Don't let him go.
We need to give him a big hand, and both of them a big hand.